I never thought a simple text in the middle of the night could turn my whole week upside down, but there I was, staring at my phone like it was a lifeline. It was just after midnight, and I was sprawled on my couch, binge-watching some dumb show I wasn't even into, when my phone buzzed. The message? Hey, I don't want to sleep alone tonight. Sure, but somehow it hit me harder than I expected. So, a little backstory. I'm Mark, 28, and generally pretty chill about most things. I live in this cramped but cozy apartment in the city, a place I've made my own over the last few years. Nothing fancy, just the usual. A beat-up couch, a small kitchen that's seen better days, and a bed that's one mattress away from total collapse. I work in graphic design, mostly freelance, and my social life is, well, let's call it selective. I'm not the kind of guy who jumps into things quickly, especially when it comes to relationships. The guy who sent that message? Ryan. We met a couple of months ago at this tiny art show downtown. I was checking out some prints when he started talking about a local band playing later that week. We ended up exchanging numbers almost on a dare, both of us skeptical if anything would come of it. But Ryan was different. He wasn't flashy or over the top. He was just easy to be around. A little rough around the edges, with this quiet sort of warmth that made you want to lean in closer, listen harder. He works as a bartender nearby, which explains the late hours and the casual invitation to hang out sometime. We hadn't seen each other in a few days, which in itself felt longer than it should, especially given how minimal our interaction had been so far. But that text, it threw me off. Was it just loneliness? Or something more? Ryan's not the type to ask for help or admit he's feeling vulnerable. I knew that because I'd caught glimpses of it. The way he sometimes stared out the bar window, lost in thought, or how he'd hint at small things without really saying much. I debated texting back. My mind was a mess of, what if this is a bad idea? And maybe he really just needs company tonight. The night wasn't cold or anything, but there was a certain kind of quiet in the air that made you notice how alone the city could feel, even when it's buzzing somewhere not far away. So yeah, I told him to come over. When he showed up, it was around 1 a.m., just like that. No big plans, no expectations. He looked a little tired, his dark hair mussed, eyes a bit bleary, but with a half smile that felt like a secret I wasn't supposed to know yet. We sat on the couch, 2 beers between us, talking quietly about nothing in particular. The kind of talk that somehow says everything without saying much at all. Then came the moment I wasn't prepared for. As if on impulse, Ryan said, I really don't want to sleep alone tonight. No hesitation, no second guessing. Just that simple, honest line. I nodded, trying to play it cool, but inside, my heart was doing something I couldn't quite name. We moved to the bedroom, the space barely big enough for the two of us, and that's when he did something that caught me completely off guard. He reached out and pulled me in close, holding me like he wasn't sure he'd ever get the chance again, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't want to let go. But that night wasn't just about keeping the loneliness at bay. It was something bigger, something neither of us expected. And as I lay there, tangled up with Ryan, I realized this was the beginning of a story I didn't even know I was ready to tell. At first, it was just that, holding. No big declarations. No awkward fumbling or trying to figure out what this meant. Just 2 people pressed close in the dark, finding some kind of quiet comfort. I wasn't great at moments like that. Vulnerable, soft, no distractions. But with Ryan, it felt different. Easier somehow. His hand rested lightly on my side, fingers tracing slow, lazy circles. I could feel the weight of the day. The noise from the bar, the tiredness from long shifts just melt away. It was like all the cracks in his armor softened, and I got a glimpse of the real guy beneath the rough edges. We didn't talk for a while, just breathed in sync. Then, almost like he needed to say it out loud, Ryan murmured, I don't do this often. Let people in, I mean. I shifted a little, propping myself up on one elbow to look at him. Yeah? I said, half teasing. You strike me as the keep-to-yourself type. He chuckled, quiet but genuine. It's easier, you know. Keeps things simple. Keeps people from getting too close, from getting hurt. The honesty caught me off guard. Here was this guy who usually played it cool, who joked and deflected, suddenly laying himself bare in my dimly lit bedroom. I wanted to say something smart or comforting, but instead, I just pulled him a little closer. "Sometimes it's worth the risk," I said quietly. And I meant it. For the first time that night, Ryan actually smiled, a slow, real smile that reached his eyes. Then he said, "You're not one of those guys who run when things get complicated, are you?" I laughed, shaking my head. "Depends on the guy. But with you? Maybe not." The room felt warmer then, like something had shifted between us. The kind of shift that makes you notice every little detail. The way his breath hitched when I brushed a stray lock of hair from his forehead, the soft scrape of his stubble against my cheek, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat under my palm. Neither of us said it, but I knew we were both thinking about what this meant, or maybe what it could mean. Eventually, sleep started to claim us, but before it fully took over, Ryan whispered, "Thanks for this, for not letting me be alone." I squeezed his hand, the simplest way to say, "Yeah, me too." The next morning, I woke up tangled in blankets, Ryan's arm thrown across my chest like he was holding on to me for dear life. It was early, the soft light just starting to spill through the curtains, and for a moment, I just lay there, soaking it all in. I didn't move, afraid that if I did, the moment would break. Then I heard a soft groan, and Ryan stirred, rubbing his eyes like he was waking from a deep dream. He looked over, caught my gaze, and for a second, everything was quiet between us. So he said, voice still rough from sleep, "How'd I end up here again?" I smirked. "You texted me at midnight and said you didn't want to sleep alone." He rolled his eyes but smiled. "Yeah, I guess that's one way to get invited over." I shrugged, trying to play it cool, but honestly, I was just happy he was still there, still close. We ended up making coffee in my tiny kitchen, the awkwardness from the night before replaced by easy chatter about nothing and everything. Ryan has this way of making you forget the noise outside, the chaos of life, and just focus on what's right in front of you. Later that day, we went for a walk through the neighborhood, the kind of spontaneous plan that felt right, even though neither of us said it aloud. We wandered past familiar spots, the little bakery that sells the best cinnamon rolls, the park where I sometimes come to clear my head. Ryan talked about his dreams, the stuff he usually keeps buried. I listened, feeling a connection build that was more than just skin deep. There was a moment when he stopped by a bench, looking out over the pond and said, "I didn't think I'd find this. Whatever this is." Not so easily. I looked at him, waiting for him to explain. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's like I've always been ready to be alone. Thought I needed that. But maybe I was just scared." "Scared of what?" I asked. "Getting hurt. Getting close," he said, voice barely more than a whisper. I nodded, understanding more than he probably realized. "Yeah, me too." We didn't need to say more. Sometimes, words just get in the way. That night, when I walked Ryan back to his place, he paused outside his door and looked up at me, eyes searching. "Mind if I crash at yours again sometime?" he asked. My heart did this stupid, happy flip. I was hoping you'd say that. And just like that, what started as a lonely night turned into something that felt like the beginning of maybe, just maybe, a real chance at something good. Something worth holding on to. After that night, things between Ryan and me started slipping into this comfortable rhythm that felt almost unreal compared to the usual chaos of dating, or, well, what passed for dating in my world. He came over more often, sometimes just to crash after a late shift, sometimes because we actually made plans. I'd never thought I'd be the kind of guy who looked forward to having someone else's stuff scattered across his place, but here we were. One Friday, a couple of weeks later, Ryan showed up at my door holding this ridiculous bouquet of wildflowers. "For you," he said, grinning like a kid caught stealing cookies. I laughed and took them, already thinking how out of character that was for him. He shrugged, saw them at the corner store and thought, why not? We drank cheap wine, played some old records I had found in a thrift store, and talked about everything and nothing. I learned he was way into old sci-fi movies, and had once tried to learn guitar but gave up after a few weeks. He teased me about my obsession with graphic novels and how I always had some weird little design project on the go. But underneath the jokes, there was this vulnerability that kept showing up. One moment in particular stuck with me. We were sitting on the floor, backs against the couch, when Ryan suddenly got quiet. I watched him for a minute before saying, "You're thinking about something." He nodded, fiddling with a loose thread on the rug. "I guess I'm just wondering if this is all real, you know? Us. Because honestly, I'm not used to this. Easy." I felt my heart tighten. Easy's good, though. Better than complicated, right? He looked up, eyes searching mine. Yeah, it is." That was the night I realized I wasn't just holding on to Ryan to keep the loneliness at bay anymore. I actually wanted him there, wanted him in my life. Things weren't perfect. Nothing ever is. Ryan's job kept weird hours, which meant sometimes I'd come home from work and find the apartment empty when I was craving company. And he had this habit of shutting down when things got too real, pulling back like he was trying to protect himself. I learned to read those signs, to give him space without letting him slip away completely. One rainy Tuesday, that space almost became a chasm. Ryan showed up soaked to the bone, looking exhausted and pissed off. He slammed a beer onto my kitchen counter and muttered something about a terrible night at work. We sat in silence for a while, the kind of silence that felt heavy and full of things unsaid. Finally, I asked, "Want to talk about it?" He shook his head. "No, it's just shit. People being assholes. Same old." I wanted to say more, to dig deeper, but sometimes silence was all anyone needed. Instead, I pulled him into a hug, the kind that says, "I'm here, no matter what." After a while, he murmured, "Thanks, Mark." Those two words felt like a lifeline. The next day, things still felt fragile, but there was a new layer to us, a quiet understanding that whatever came, we'd face it together. It wasn't always smooth sailing, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the bumps. One night, a few weeks after that, Ryan and I ended up back in my bedroom, the city lights casting soft patterns through the blinds. He looked at me, this strange mix of nervous and hopeful, and said, "I've been thinking about us." My stomach did that weird flutter thing. "Yeah?" "Yeah." He took a breath. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore. Not just tonight, but maybe not ever." I smiled, feeling that same warmth from the night we first held each other. "I was hoping you'd say that." He laughed, then pulled me close again, like he was making sure I was real, and so was this moment. And honestly, I never wanted it to end. After that night, when Ryan said those words about not wanting to sleep alone, not just tonight, but maybe never, it felt like everything shifted, like the ground beneath us softened just enough to let something new grow. I could feel it in the way his fingers entwined with mine, like he was asking permission and offering a promise at the same time. The days that followed were filled with little moments that carved out a space for us in each other's lives. Like the time he showed up unannounced with 2 slices of pizza, knowing I didn't have the energy to cook after a long day. Or when I caught him humming some dumb pop song while he was making coffee, completely off-key but grinning like it was the best tune in the world. Those moments weren't big, but they felt like the pieces of a puzzle we were putting together, one awkward, tender piece at a time. One Saturday afternoon, we found ourselves wandering through a street market near my place. The kind of market that sells everything from vintage vinyl to homemade candles and questionable street food. Ryan was in his element, scanning through records with a look that made me smile. Like a kid discovering treasure, he held up an old album, squinting at the cover. "Ever heard of this band?" I shook my head. "Nope. Sounds like a challenge." He laughed, the kind of laugh that fills up a room and spills out onto the street. "If you're up for it, come over tonight. I'll play it for you." That night, his apartment smelled like burnt popcorn and cheap beer, but it felt like home. We sprawled on his sagging couch, the record spinning with crackles and pop, and he taught me the words to songs I'd never heard before. I caught myself watching him more than the music. How his lips moved, how his eyes lit up when he got excited, how comfortable he made even the most mundane things feel. But amidst all the easy laughter and late-night talks, there were still moments when Ryan would pull back, walls rising just enough to remind me that he wasn't used to letting people in completely. Once, After a particularly long silence, I asked, "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, then shrugged. "Just stuff, old stuff, things that make me think maybe I'm better off alone." I wanted to argue, to tell him he wasn't, that I was here, that we were here. But sometimes, words felt hollow against years of doubt and self-protection. Instead, I reached out and laid my hand over his. "You don't have to do this alone anymore." He squeezed my hand, a small but powerful gesture. "Thanks, Mark, for being patient with me." Being patient was easier when I knew the payoff was moments like this, the way he'd lean into me when he thought no one was looking, or the quiet strength he showed when he finally opened up a little more. It made me want to be better, to be the kind of guy who deserved that trust. A few weeks later, Ryan invited me to a party at the bar where he worked. I was nervous. Bars and crowds aren't really my scene, but I wanted to show up for him. When I walked in, the place was packed, music thumping, people laughing and shouting over the noise. Ryan spotted me immediately, a grin spreading across his face that made the noise fade away. He pulled me behind the bar, offering me a drink. "Welcome to my world." I watched him work, effortlessly charming everyone with that same quiet warmth he showed me in private. It hit me then just how much I admired him, not just for who he was, but for how he carried himself through everything. Later, when the crowd thinned and the night started winding down, Ryan led me outside to a small alley behind the bar. The city lights twinkled above us, and for a moment, we just stood there. He reached for my hand, fingers lacing with mine, and said, "I'm glad you came." "Me too," I said, my voice low, because right then, with the hum of the city around us, it felt like we were the only two people in the world. Our first kiss wasn't some grand gesture. It was quiet, a brush of lips that said everything we were still too scared to say out loud. It was imperfect and real, just like us. After that night, things started feeling more settled, even as we navigated the usual ups and downs. We learned how to argue without shutting down, how to apologize without pride getting in the way, how to hold each other when words weren't enough. One evening, about 2 months in, Ryan and I were sitting on my balcony, sharing a bottle of cheap wine and watching the city lights flicker. He looked over at me, eyes soft and serious. "Mark," he said, voice almost hesitant, "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it. If you want me to." I smiled, heart pounding in a way that caught me off guard. I want that more than anything. He reached out, pulling me close, and I felt like we were exactly where we were supposed to be. Two people who'd started as strangers, held each other through loneliness, and found something worth fighting for. And honestly, I can't wait to see where this goes. It wasn't like we had suddenly flipped a switch and everything was perfect. No, our story was more like one of those old vinyl records Ryan loved, a little scratchy, full of unexpected pauses, and the occasional off-key note that somehow made it feel real. But having him there, sharing those moments with me, was something I never thought I'd want as badly as I did. A few days after that night on the balcony, I found myself waking up to sunlight filtering through the curtains, and Ryan's arm draped lazily over my chest. I stared down at him for a while, his messy hair falling over his forehead, breath slow and steady. The vulnerability in that morning quiet was different now. It wasn't just about not wanting to sleep alone. It was about wanting to wake up next to him, every day if possible. We'd been seeing each other for a couple of months by then, still navigating this new territory with shaky feet and hopeful hearts. Ryan's guard was coming down bit by bit, and in turn, I was learning to be patient, to listen closely to what he didn't say as much as what he did. One afternoon, we decided to spend the day at a nearby park. Nothing fancy, just blankets, sandwiches, and a bottle of soda we kept passing back and forth. The trees were still holding onto their last leaves, and there was that crisp fall air that smells like change and possibility. Ryan laid his head on my shoulder, and I felt this swell of something I didn't have words for but didn't need to. We sat like that for a while, watching a group of kids chase a frisbee, the way the sunlight bounced through the branches above. "I don't know how you put up with me," Ryan said suddenly, voice low, like he was telling me a secret. I smiled without looking, feeling the warmth of him against me. "You don't have to be perfect to be worth it." He shifted, looking at me with those dark eyes that always seemed to see right through the bullshit. "Perfect's overrated anyway." We laughed, and in that easy way we'd found, everything felt less complicated. But the truth was, both of us carried scars, mine from past relationships that fizzled before they really started, his from years of learning to fend for himself. Those experiences shaped us, but they didn't define what we were building together. Later that week, Ryan invited me to meet his friends. I was a little nervous, not because I didn't want to meet them, but because Ryan was usually so private. His friends were the kind who'd been there through thick and thin, and I wasn't sure if I fit into that circle yet. The night was surprisingly smooth. His friends were welcoming, teasing Ryan about the way he talked about me, which was adorable and mortifying at the same time. I realized that seeing him in his world, with people who knew him fully, made me feel like I was stepping into something real. Not just a fleeting connection, but the start of something lasting. One of his friends, a guy named Ethan, pulled me aside and said, "He's lucky to have you, man. You make him happy." Hearing that from someone else made my chest tighten with a mix of pride and a little disbelief. Me? Lucky to have Ryan? Yeah, I was feeling that too. But of course, life isn't all smooth sailing. There were days when Ryan's walls would go up again, and I'd feel him pull away without really understanding why. One night, after a small argument about plans we couldn't agree on, he ended up leaving abruptly, leaving the apartment colder than it had been in weeks. I sat on the couch long after he was gone, replaying every word, every look, wondering if I'd said something wrong or if maybe this was all just too much for him. When he finally texted me hours later, it was simple. "Sorry, needed space." I texted back, "I'm here when you're ready." The waiting was hard, but I knew that with Ryan, patience wasn't just a virtue, it was part of the deal. And when he came back, the relief in his eyes made it clear he wasn't running anymore. One Sunday afternoon, we found ourselves back on my balcony, the city stretching out before us like a promise. Ryan was unusually quiet, fiddling with a ring he'd absent-mindedly started twisting around his finger. "Mark," he said finally, looking serious in a way that made my heart skip, "I'm not great at this whole relationship thing, but I want to try. With you." I reached out, taking his hand, feeling the rough edges of that ring warm against my skin. "I want that too," I said, "more than anything." The way he smiled then, like the weight of so many doubts was lifting, was something I wanted to remember forever. That night, when we fell asleep tangled together, I finally understood. He didn't just want to hold me to keep the loneliness away. He wanted to hold me because he trusted me. And that was the best thing anyone had ever given me. Looking back, it's wild to think how a single text, "I don't want to sleep alone," could lead to this. But sometimes, the smallest moments are the ones that change everything. The next few weeks felt like we were walking a tightrope, balancing between the comfort of what we'd built and the fear of losing it all. Ryan and I were figuring out how to be us in a way neither of us had done before. And honestly, that was both terrifying and incredible. One evening, after a long day of me banging away at the computer and Ryan coming off a brutal double shift, he showed up at my door with that tired half smile he wears when he wants me to know he's still fighting. He collapsed onto my couch like he was ready to pass out. "I don't want to be a drag," he muttered, rubbing his face. I shook my head, setting down the takeout I'd picked up on the way home. "You're not. You don't have to be perfect." He gave me that sideways glance, the one that says, "Really?" but with a little hope hiding underneath. "Yeah, really," I shrugged. "I'm not exactly perfect either." That got a laugh from him, and for a second, the tension in his shoulders eased. We ate in silence, the kind that feels comfortable, like the quiet before a storm, or maybe just the calm after one. And then, out of nowhere, Ryan said, "You ever think about where this is going?" I paused, fork halfway to my mouth. It's not a question I was expecting, especially not from him. "Honestly," I said, "I'm still figuring it out, but I want to see where it leads." "With you." He nodded slowly, like he was processing something big. "I don't have all the answers," he added, "but I know I'm tired of running." That hit me harder than I expected. Ryan, the guy who'd always kept people at arm's length, admitting he was tired of running, it felt like a breakthrough. Later that night, we ended up on my balcony again, the city lights twinkling below us. Ryan had his head on my shoulder, and I could feel the steady rise and fall of his breath. "Promise me something?" he said after a while. Anything. No matter what happens. Don't let me slip away. I tightened my arm around him. Never. But it wasn't just about promises. It was about actions, about showing up even when it's hard. Ryan had a way of pushing people away when things got rough, like he thought he was safer alone. And I was learning how to reach through those walls without breaking them down too fast. One weekend, we took a spontaneous trip out of the city. Just a drive to the coast, no real plan, just the open road and the sound of the ocean waiting for us. We found a quiet beach, the kind that feels like a secret, and spent hours walking barefoot, talking about everything from childhood dreams to the dumb mistakes we'd made. At one point, Ryan stopped and looked out at the water, the sunset casting a golden glow over his face. "I don't want to be the guy who gives up," he said quietly. "Who says you have to?" I asked, stepping closer. He smiled, a bit shy, and took my hand. It was that simple. Back in the city, life kept moving, with its chaos and noise, but having Ryan by my side made it bearable in a way I hadn't expected. We weren't perfect. We made mistakes, had our disagreements, and sometimes struggled to communicate, but we were trying. And that mattered. One night, after a particularly tough day, Ryan showed up at my door with his eyes a little glassy, but a smile that was real. "I need you," he said, and I needed him too. As we sat on my couch, the world outside fading into background noise, I realized something. Sometimes the person who says they don't want to sleep alone is really saying they want to find someone worth staying awake for. And maybe, just maybe, I was that someone for Ryan. There's a quiet kind of magic in those moments when everything feels simple and real, the kind you don't see coming but know you'll remember. For Ryan and me, it wasn't fireworks or grand declarations. It was the steady, slow unfolding of trust, a shared space where we didn't have to pretend or hide. A few weeks after that night, he told me he was tired of running. We found ourselves back on my couch, a playlist humming softly in the background and a half-empty bottle of wine between us. Ryan looked over at me, that same shy smile tugging at his lips. "You know," he said, "I used to think that sleeping alone was just how things were supposed to be. Like it was normal. But now? I can't imagine it anymore." I reached out, brushing a stray curl from his forehead. "Neither can I." He leaned into my touch, eyes closing for a moment, and when he opened them again, there was something steady and sure there that hadn't been before. "It's not about never being alone," he said. "It's about knowing there's someone who's there when you need them, someone you want to hold on to," and that hit me right in the chest. We didn't need to say more. The space between us was full of everything we'd been through, of the quiet promises we'd made, of the kind of love that's built in the small things, holding hands while walking, sharing late-night laughs, the comfort of just being together. Looking back, it's funny how a simple text, "I don't want to sleep alone," opened a door neither of us expected. But it wasn't just about not being lonely. It was about finding the courage to let someone in, to be vulnerable, and to discover that sometimes the best kind of company is the one that stays. Ryan's still not perfect. Neither am I, but we're good at this, at showing up, at holding on, at choosing each other again and again. And honestly, that's more than enough. So yeah, sometimes you don't want to sleep alone, but then when you find the right person, you don't have to. And somehow, that makes all the difference.